This is the Secular Nation Podcast, an official production of the Atheist Alliance of America, bringing you breaking news and stories about the intersection of the atheist free thought movement and government action.
This is the Secular Nation Podcast. In this episode, we're going to be talking with a friend of mine. This is Aron Ra speaking to my friend Faisal Saeed Al Mutar, who is in Washington, D.C., correct?
In New York for now.
You're in New York for now. Okay. Are you normally out of D.C.?
Yeah. I mean, I'm based between D.C. and New York. So that's my life.
Yeah. What a tough choice. Anyway.
Yeah, first world problems.
So, with all of the news that the current regime has given us lately, of course, there's been this issue about, immigration and in particular the Muslim ban. And one of the reasons that I wanted to talk to you was because I noticed at one point that you and I were scheduled to speak in 3 different venues on 3 consecutive weekends. I mean, you and I together were booked in London, and then the next weekend we would be in Springfield, Missouri. And in the next weekend, we were supposed to be in Sao Paulo, Brazil. And it suddenly occurred to you that you might not be able to make those events under the current situation. Is that right?
Yeah. So the situation changed a bit since then. So at the beginning, when they issued the first executive order, they said that even people with the green cards, and that would mean people who are permanent residents of the United States, would not be able to come back to the country. And that would have definitely affected me because I am coming from Iraq and also happen to be a permanent resident. And then they changed it. And also then the courts, I think from Brooklyn, kind of reduced the effect of that immigration ban or Muslim ban. So I mean, I'm gonna take the risk actually on Friday to go to Toronto to speak at my friend's best friend book launch, the Atheist Muslim. So it's gonna be organized by Center for Inquiry Toronto, and I'm gonna speak with him there. So some people told me not to leave, but I decided that I'm going to take the risk and do it. And if things go well, hopefully I will be able to do the events that you mentioned, the London and the Sao Paulo one.
Well, I have to bear some bad news. I found my wife informed me that Sao Paulo has been canceled. So apparently neither of us are going to Brazil.
Oh, I'm sorry. I had no idea.
Yeah, I didn't either. I'll have to check into that. But I also failed on the introduction. I said my friend Faisal, but I didn't give you any more significance than that. I mean,
that's fine. We're friends, so that's an honorable introduction.
Well, people are wondering, why are you speaking in all these countries? And so go ahead and correct my mistake, because I know you're head of a number of different organizations and I can't even remember them all. So.
So I am what's soon to be my organization that I'm going to establish. So I'm going to be the president of Ideas Beyond Borders, and which is an organization focused on helping voices of human rights as a counter narrative to extremism. Over the past decade, I would say. Coming from Iraq and then moving to Lebanon and Malaysia and then coming here to the United States, I have built a very big database of counter-extremist activists and human rights activists around the Muslim world. And my focus has been of how we can find a reasonable solution to extremism. I've been a victim of extremism myself. I lost my brother and my cousin to Al-Qaeda during the civil war in Iraq in 2007. And as a result, I ended up becoming a refugee. And I ended up in the United States in 2013, and I've been pretty active for a large part of my life, fighting for secular and liberal values, and yeah, so that's my.
I would have to say you've been active for a good deal of your life, and I mean, I met you. It had been several years now. You were at a humanist conference in San Diego, and I was very impressed with your off-the-cuff presentations of what you said it meant to you to be an American. That was a very good presentation you were giving there, and it wasn't even a formal presentation. You were just out talking to the people.
Yeah, I remember that very, very well.
Yeah, I was very moved by that, and I was fortunate to have caught it on camera. But what other organizations have you set up?
One of the organizations I've also worked on for quite a while now, movements.org, which is also to help human rights dissidents. And also I've helped set up the Global Secular Humanist Movement that is also focused on spreading humanist values and helping humanists, especially in Muslim-dominated countries, and connecting kind of the struggle that we all have. Because even though that our enemies or our targets could be different, but I think that in general we share the same goals. So I started this kind of movement that has been mostly focused on the digital world, and that has grown up to be kind of one of the biggest in the planet in terms of likes and engagements, and so that's kind of my three main things: Ideas Beyond Borders, movements.org, and Global Secular Humanist Movement.
Are you going to be in April? Are you going to be in Washington, D.C. in April for the Scientist March?
I think I will, yeah.
Okay. Well, because I've had you over to my house for dinner, and we need to return the favor.
No, of course, yeah.
I just invited myself to Men's house. So anyway, do you have an opinion on the current situation with Trump and how he's dealing with Muslims and people who are no longer Muslim? And I see that a lot of countries, they don't seem to see a distinction between the Muslims and apostates from them. I mean, like I was in Germany a few months ago interviewing refugees, one of them from Saudi, another one from Bangladesh, and they said that in Germany has these camps, these refugee camps that were described as hellish, in which apostates would be, if you come from a Muslim country, this is where you go, and it doesn't matter if you still believe in Islam or if you're secular now, they're still going to put you into the same mix. And of course, there's some very serious problems with that.
Yeah, so when it comes to Trump, I have many opinions about Trump. But let's focus on this one. So I have been very much against this ban for multiple reasons. And one of the main reasons is that it's actually the one that you have mentioned, is the fact that there is no distinction whatsoever between Muslims and non-Muslims. And also, I mean, there are some people, at least within the right wing, who say, no, it's not really a Muslim ban. And actually, if you think about it, it's partially a Muslim ban. So they said
it was sold as a Muslim ban. I mean, Trump used that word when he said that they were going to try to find some way of doing this legally.
Yeah. So, I mean, the caveat, so they put a caveat that said, okay, we're going to ban people from these 6 Muslim-dominated countries, and we're going to exempt religious minorities. So if you're going to take Muslim majority countries and exempt minorities, means you're targeting Muslims.
Very clearly, yes.
Yeah, like logic, bitches. So it is it's not absolute Muslim ban. It's not. It means that if you're a Muslim living in Canada or UK or from the countries that are not affected by the ban, you are actually exempted as well. So it's a partial Muslim ban. So yeah, my first the curses of it is that it creates an absolute blanket ban pretty much on everyone coming from these countries. And even the Department of Homeland Security actually issued a new report saying that there is hardly a connection between the person's nationality in terrorism. I mean, as if we don't know that already. So I was like, the water is wet. But anyway, so that's my first one. My second one is that it sends a message that the United States is at war with Muslims, which is not true. I mean, I'm no matter how much I'm perceived to be very critical of Islam and conservative Islam and so on, I do think that we have many allies that we can build and alliances we can build with some Muslim people to fight against extremism. And that kind of destroys this concept of what is sometimes called the clash of civilizations, is that there is a war between the West and the Muslims. And the West believes that, and the Muslims believe that. And I actually don't happen to see it this way. I happen to know that there are many Muslims who not necessarily share the same values as we do, but at the same time, they can definitely be considered allies in the war against Al-Qaeda and ISIS. And that actually been proven correct during 2007, during the surge and during what was called the Awakening Forces by General David Petraeus. And his main idea was that we have to work with Sunni tribes to fight against Al-Qaeda. It's been kind of a very successful attempt to actually drive Al-Qaeda away from cities and populated areas. So the message that Trump sent so far, with that ban and with that kind of, how to say, generalizing language of, I mean, in his campaign, he said it's going to be, after the San Bernardino attack, he said we're going to have a complete shutdown of Muslims. So, and then now he says, no, it's not a Muslim ban. Well, but you already spoke it. But anyway, so yeah, I mean, this is kind of my two major disagreements so far, or at least with this Trump ban. I have a million other disagreements with Trump when it comes to other things, but and that has been affecting so many people I know who are, I would say, on the forefront of fighting extremism. I mean, I know some women rights activists who live now in Boston and may actually have her visa canceled because she's from Iranian origin. She has an Iranian passport, and her name is Raya, and she studies in Boston University. And there are so many other people who are mostly, I would say, secularists and liberals who pretty much been affected by this kind of generalizing rhetoric and yeah. So I mean, I as you probably know, I mean, I've also been kind of very critical of the reaction from the left when it comes to Islam and radical Islam in particular. But that doesn't mean I justify the overreaction, or maybe not actually overreaction, but rather a crazy reaction coming from the alt-right and all of these people.
This is what is the biggest problem with this country, the way that we've divided ourselves on any label that we can. It's very frustrating. When I was watching a video of one of Bernie Sanders' recent public comments, and I happened to check the comments on the video for that, and of course everybody's accusing of being a communist.
Yeah,
I don't. How do you not pay any more attention than that? I mean, how can people be so confident and so wrong about so many things at the same time? I mean, we don't have a lot of nuance in our thinking, right? Everything's got to be black or white, left or right.
Yeah, and that's I mean, that's kind of one of the biggest issues we are facing right now, especially on this subject of so I mean.
And I want to add to this, if I can. I had a debate a few months ago in Houston against a British Muslim creationist, and one of his associates. So we had dinner after the debate, and I thought that was an interesting conversation too. Boy, I wish I could have recorded that. But in my conversation with his American associate, who runs this this pro-Islam Dawa organization, we brought up Trump, right? And suddenly we had common ground.
Yeah.
Because he was terrified of the things that I mean, genuinely terrified of the things that are going on with our administration. And I told him, as him being president of an American Islamic support group or Dawa group or whatever, and me being president of Atheist Alliance of America, I said I will oppose you wherever and however necessary ideologically, but as far as nobody's a better defender of the First Amendment than an atheist, and I said, on this matter, on First Amendment rights and the freedom of religion and so forth, we could actually work together as well, and we shook hands on that with an agreement.
Yeah. So I'm complete agreement with this. I mean, for me, I mean, my motto is humans have rights, cultures and beliefs don't have rights. So humans who happen to be Muslim, Christian, Jewish, whatever, they have a human rights as everyone else, and nobody just because they are Muslim, they need that I favor discrimination or hatred against them. But that is actually raises a very interesting point. So I think that what's happening right now as a result of this polarization is that we are getting more and more defined of what we are against than what we are for, right?
Exactly, yes.
So, and that actually raises a very big problem. So, I mean, let's talk about ISIS, okay? If I just define myself as I'm anti-ISIS, you know who also opposes ISIS? The Nazis oppose ISIS. So, which is true, right? The Nazis hate ISIS. Maybe they hate them for wrong reasons. Maybe they hate them because many of them are brown people and they think of them as people from inferior race. But at the same time, when someone defines themselves by what they're against, they eventually set up alliances that eventually not of people who don't necessarily adhere to their values. So what's happening, for example, as a result of the travel ban and as a result of the Trump administration. So you mentioned Bernie Sanders, who is a guy that I actually respect, and I may have some minor disagreements with him, but I still respect the guy. So Bernie Sanders hired a woman called Linda Sarsour to be his campaign manager in New York, and she also happened to be the co-chair of the Women's March. So these are two things that I actually agree with. I mean, I agree with Bernie Sanders, I agree with the Women's March. But because she is anti-Trump and because she happens to be from a Muslim community, Bernie Sanders formed an alliance with her. And then you look at Linda Sarsour's Twitter account. And number one, she has advocated multiple times for Sharia law, which is actually quote-unquote theocracy, Islamic theocracy, right? And second time, she actually said to, which I think is a person Ayan Hirsi Ali, she told her that she doesn't deserve her vagina. Sorry to use the word, but that is what she said. So Linda Sarsour, the person that Bernie Sanders hired, said that to Ayan Hirsi Ali. And it's all documented on Twitter.
Wow.
So what's happening, yeah, and leave aside that so many, like if you look at her Twitter account, actually she deleted some of them, but she actually forgot that actually Google can actually save these tweets. So like when you do something on the internet, it never goes away. So yeah. There was a writer called Lalo Dagish, who was a Palestinian as well. He documented most of her former tweets about her advocating for Sharia law and attacking Ayan in a very vicious way. And this is a person that was hired. This is a person that was hired to be Bernie Sanders' campaign manager and the co-chair of Women's March. And add to that, she was actually advocating for hijab, which is itself a sign for modesty culture, and which is, I would argue, is also a sign of what most feminists should stand against in terms of the symbolism, the fact that resembles that women have to cover up because men cannot control themselves, and therefore they're going to start harassing and raping women, which is actually
what we do, right? I mean, I grew up in Los Angeles, where we're just, bikinis at the beach, and that's all men could be, with just controllable rape mobs, right?
Yeah, which is like, I mean, it's sexist to both. I mean, the way that I say it is that it's sexist to both men and women. It says that women have to cover up, which is sexist by itself. And then it says men don't have a control over themselves. And that also removes all the responsibility that actually men have. So see, like, back to the polarization subject, is that just because this woman happens to oppose Trump, or she happens to be a minority from the Muslim religion, and in America is the minority, but it's where I come from, it makes up 90% of the population. So then these alliances start not making any sense. I mean, this woman and so many other women, I mean, one of the people that President Obama hired, for example, Dalia Mujahid, which is actually, that's not really common knowledge, but she used to work at the White House during the Obama administration, and many people that I know who are experts of counter-extremism have proven that she has connections to Hizb ut-Tahrir and the Muslim Brotherhood. So this is a person. So if this is true, that she actually has connections to the Brotherhood, which is an Islamist organization that actually advocates for killing gays, Sharia law, slavery of women, in terms of modesty culture. And this is a person that was hired during the Obama administration. And I think that part of it was, okay, the right wing is hateful of Muslims, or some of them have issues with Muslims, or they generalize on Muslims, as in the case with the Muslim ban. So there is the reaction, which is to the reaction itself, and then that they keep feeding to each other, and eventually nuance gets killed in all of that conversation. Is that on one side, for example, on the travel ban, I am very aware that there is, at Farid Zakaria from CNN said, he said there is a cancer of extremism is growing in the Muslim world. I mean, that's a fact. There is a problem within the Muslim world called Islamic extremism. It's not just a fringe minority. It's not 1%. It's a significant amount. It's not 100% for sure, but it's not 0.01%. It's a much larger section. And it is fair for any country, especially Western countries, to be aware of that and also create vetting systems that are compatible with that challenge that we have right now. So without going into generalizations. So I mean, I 3 years ago, actually, I think 2 years ago, we had a debate in New York about Islamophobia and the usage of the term Islamophobia, etc. And Ayaan Hirsi Ali was supposed to speak, and then she couldn't come because of death threats to the venue and death threats to her. So I replaced her. And as a result, the venue was filled around with police and security. And I asked myself the question, is that what are we afraid of in that event? Who are we afraid that who gonna bomb us? And then at the event, I made the comment that just 3 miles away from the venue we had the event, we have the Book of Mormon, right? And nobody is worried that the Book of Mormon is going to be blown up by Mitt Romney relatives, right? Nobody is worried that just because someone makes fun of Mormonism, the Mormons are going to start blowing up buildings. Obviously, there's probably some minor extremists who probably want to do that. But if you compare that to the Muslim world, this is actually a much higher percentage. So if we're not able to have a reasonable conversations about Islam in New York City, for all places, in New York City, Los Angeles, and Houston, Texas, everywhere, then where we can have them, and who are the people that were actually afraid of blowing up these buildings?
Yeah, that taps into something that I've been talking about or complaining about here recently. That, you know, there have been a lot of things done against the First Amendment. I mean, literally every provision of the First Amendment. It started in Standing Rock under Obama, is being spread out through the rest of the country, where, you know, the establishment of religion and the prohibition of religion, you know, both of those aspects already under fire, obviously, just by the existence of the new regime. But then prohibitions against, you know, the freedom of the press. They want to criminalize freedom to peaceably assemble. Freedom of speech is now being broadened on hate crimes, so you're now being restricted more on your freedom of speech. So where are our freedoms? You know, if every provision of the First Amendment goes, then we are no longer the land of the free. And as you've already pointed out, it seems that we haven't been the home of the brave in quite some time.
Yeah, so that is, I mean, this is kind of a very big issue when it comes to this subject of hate speech, and I'm afraid, I mean, Europe, for example, is having lots of these issues when it comes to First Amendment and freedom of speech, and it's being now used by religious demagogues to silence any form of criticism against their own religion. And because of in Germany and Austria and these places, because of the Holocaust and World War II and stuff, they have developed a very strong cultural sensitivity, quote unquote, to stop criticizing any form of religion or minority religion, because it may eventually lead to the rise of a form of Nazism or kind of a far-right movement. And it actually backfires whenever someone creates a loophole about free speech and say this is not, you should not allow it for you to say that, you will see that many people will try to say that, and eventually the far-right group's going to be empowered by this because they're going to be considered heroes for free speech. I mean, just like the case happened with Milo Yiannopoulos. I mean, Milo Yiannopoulos and I, probably the disagreement between me and him are between the moon and the sun. But what happened is that because he has been pandering to this kind of concept that there is all this censorship and stuff within U.S. campuses, so he became a martyr for free speech, while he doesn't deserve to be a martyr for free speech. He's a clown, right? He's just trolling. He goes in campuses and says stuff like feminism is cancer, blah, blah, blah. And then he gets people agitated. And then these people agitated try to censor him. And then he was like, you know what? I told you so. These are the liberals. Look at how stupid they are. And yeah, so this is.
So I wonder then if I can just invite myself to some Christian college to speak to them about atheism, and then when they deny me, then I can tell them that they're censoring me.
Well, I mean, with case with Milo, he was invited by Republican groups and student groups. So he was officially invited by some of these groups. But the people who try to take him down from speaking are people who are not from these groups. But yeah, so like I'm very worried about the First Amendment and the attacks is being attacked by pretty much all extremes in that regard. I mean, all of this censorship that's Trump is doing against the press and all his attacks on the press to stop them from questioning him is also very worrisome, because the press is very important in kind of creating a checks and balances and questioning authority. So you have these attacks coming from the right, or at least in that regard, the Trump right. And then you have the kind of what Majid Nawaz and others refer to as the regressive left, in terms of the people who try to, again, use censorship. I mean, there is this theory by a French philosopher, I forgot his name, it's called the horseshoe theory.
Yes, I was familiar with that, where you go so far to the left that you end up on the right.
Exactly, yeah. And you end up so much on the right that you actually end up being the same thing.
Yeah.
And that's what we're seeing kind of right now with the polarization that we're seeing, is that I'm really afraid that we're going to reach out to this level. And I'm trying my best to actually try to bring at least the issues that I'm very familiar with, the issues of Islam and extremism and stuff, that I try to bring as much nuance as possible to the conversation and actually bring some solutions other than just make noise about it or become part of the problem.
Yeah. Now you mentioned that, people are defining themselves by what they are against. And very often people describe themselves by what they hate, which was never about me. I mean, I'm president of an atheist group, which means that the primary identification there is that I don't believe in God. But, you and I met at humanist groups, so we both speak at humanist conventions as well, and this is something we believe in. And you've been on my podcast a number of times. I mean, I have the podcast, the Raw Men podcast, whose mission it is not to just argue with people as some of the other podcasts want to do, but I want to spot. I'm tired of people just always being critical, who only are negative, and everybody can can find the flaws in anything and pick nits at everything. But I wanted to talk to people who are taking positive action to make the world a better place. And that's why you've been on my show a couple of times.
Well, thank you very much for considering me part of the positive list.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So I mean, my back to the subject, try to bring nuance into this. Is that one of the things that we need to have to differentiate in our discourse is to differentiate between looking at Muslims at a spectrum. So I created a spectrum I call it the Muslim spectrum, in which people go from super fundamentalist, as in case with ISIS, and zero being people who are cultural Muslim. And I would consider myself to some extent belong to that. I like my shish kebabs and I like my hummus. So there is a part of me that is still Arab culture, and I speak Arabic. So my first language is Arabic, so there's definitely part of my culture that has Islamic resemblance. But I don't believe in the theology. So there are people who are fundamentalists, and there are people who use violent means to achieve Sharia law, and that's ISIS, Al Qaeda, Boko Haram, all of this stuff. Let's say that these people are 9 to 10. And then you have people who are 7 to 8 who are Islamists. The difference with Islamists and jihadists is that Islamists believe in using democracy against itself. So in order for them to kill a gay person, what they do is that they get the approval of 51% of the population to throw the gays from the rooftop, while ISIS takes over a land and throw the gays from the rooftop. So eventually ISIS and the Muslim Brotherhood and all of these Islamic groups have a lot in common in terms of their imposition of Sharia law. Can you hear me, by the way?
I can. I just wanted to. I'm glad that you're going on about the nuance thing, because that's been just the biggest issue for me, and why people don't understand anything. This is very frustrating. I mean, it's not just in the United States either. We're seeing it more and more across Europe. And I used to look at some European countries as being more advanced than we are, at least socially. You know, at least when you go to Europe, I'm sure you've noticed that the people generally there know more about American history than Americans do.
Yeah. I mean, that's the case for every. That's the case also for every immigrant in America.
Yeah, but now we're not seeing the high level of education in Europe that dwarfs the United States. Now we're seeing where it's actually diminishing in Europe as well.
And
so again, you have people thinking in very black and white terms, where they can't understand that, you know, that socialism doesn't mean communism, and being born in a Muslim country doesn't mean that you're Muslim now, and doesn't mean any of these other things that they automatically assume it to be.
Yeah, it doesn't mean you're a terrorist either. And
Yeah. I've actually seen a lot of posts here in Texas. I've seen a lot of posts where people have commonly associated Muslim and terrorist, that they are effectively the same thing in the eyes of many of your the laity in this state.
Yeah, and this is I mean, it's really interesting. So I have been, which is weirdly to say, I've been a victim of anti-Muslim bigotry, even though I'm not a Muslim myself. So I got people who are accusing me of lying. So I am actually a secret Muslim. I am undercover Muslim who's trying to impose Sharia law using atheism. I'm like, wow, you actually think I'm much smarter than I am.
Well, you remember what Newt Gingrich said, that his fear was that the United States is in his grandchildren's age. The United States would be operated by atheist Islamic terrorists or
yes, I remember that. Yeah,
atheist Muslims or something like that. I mean, what does that even mean?
I mean, the same was said about Obama, right? When people were calling him a communist Muslim jihadist, I will be like, you know that these things are naturally, they have nothing in common. But who cares about facts, right? Like, facts are a Jewish conspiracy theory. Yeah.
And I'm sure that Obama's going to come get our guns eventually.
Yeah, in his fourth term under a different name. Yeah, so there is, I mean, all these conspiracy theories that, I mean, there has been like it's kind of a level of very strong paranoia, that a lot of it has to do with, I mean, just the pure xenophobia, in my opinion. I mean, some of it is legitimate. So that's the issue, is that I think it is reasonable to be fearful of some Muslims. Okay, so I mean, as an atheist and from a Muslim background, there are a significant amount of Muslims who believe that apostates should be killed. I mean, that has been proven by Pew Research, Gallup poll, etc., etc.
Yeah.
I think it is reasonable for me to fear people who want to kill me. I mean, that is completely reasonable in my opinion. And the same can be said about a gay person who is afraid of. So I mean, if a gay person is afraid of Christians who thinks gays should be killed, he's not being a Christian phobe, right? He's not. He's actually being a reasonable person. But at the same time, that's kind of where the line is for me. I mean, Mark Twain once said, "All generalizations are false, including this one." Okay,
that's one of my favorite sayings. I saw a presentation by Nas Ishmael in California where he went over this whole thing about Islamophobia and how, justified fear of some aspects of Islam or some practitioners, of some Muslims in their beliefs. This is reasonable because when people express their desire to kill you, that is a reasonable fear.
Exactly.
But when you lose that nuance so that you become the broad brush blanket statement against everybody from that part of the world, then it becomes a simple prejudice, and people don't understand the difference between that either.
Yeah. So that's where my line is. I mean, what you just explained is just where I draw the line, is that it's reasonable to be fearful of some Muslims, but it's wrong to be fearful of every Muslim and anyone who speaks a different language that may be considered Islamic, like Arabic and Urdu and stuff. I mean, that's kind of when I was growing up in Iraq, this is how I did my calculus most of the time, is that there are some Muslims that I go to school with who are completely fine and friendly and very wonderful people, and they care about education and feeding their families and so on. And there are some who were members of Al-Qaeda. And there are, in my opinion, multiple ways of recognizing who is who in terms of their practice. I mean, you have to do a lot of kind of a psychological profiling there, even though the word of profiling may actually antagonize or trigger some people. So I am sorry if anyone is triggered what I said. But we have to be able to differentiate between those who represent a threat to our way of life and those who don't. And those who don't are our best allies in fighting those who do, right? So I mean, the biggest victims of Islamic extremism are Muslims themselves. And
yes,
there are many Muslims.
That's another aspect that I wish people would understand. I mean, when they talk about ISIS, for example, you get Christian groups that'll go on about their persecution complex, and they'll say, there's 7 Christians were executed in this thing in a place that has already killed 400 Muslims, right? Well, why aren't they recognizing that the number one casualty, the demographic of, for ISIS, for example, is other Muslims?
Yeah. So that again goes back to the spectrum that I was talking about. So those who are not extremists, so for someone like ISIS, they are on the right pole. So they are, everything that is quite left to them is considered very left, because they are so much on the right in that regard. So according to ISIS, even Sunni Muslims who smoke cigarettes are infidels. So their definition of infidels, and that's why there's a concept within what is called Salafi Islam, which is Saudi Arabia is one of the main exporters of it, our quote unquote our ally in the war on terror, is that they have a concept called takfirism, and takfirism means that you declare people who identify as Muslims to be non-Muslim, and therefore is justified to kill them. So that's why you see one of the main reasons why the victims of ISIS are Muslims is the fact that ISIS do not consider these Muslims to be Muslims enough.
You're not Muslim enough.
Yeah, so for them is...
You're not a true Christian.
Exactly, yeah. So for them, it's my way or the highway. So I mean, that's the definition of extremist, right? So their definition, so there was a book by, so it's actually an Al-Qaeda manual called The Management of Savagery, which I recommend if people are really interested to know more about what these terrorist groups believe. So it's a book written by a guy called Abu Bakr Naji, who is a kind of an imam for Al-Qaeda. And in his book, he justifies killing Muslims who are, in his mind, not Muslims enough. And this war has been going on between the Muslim world for quite a while. I mean, this is a 1,000-year war, probably more, between since the division of Sunnis and Shias, and now the Shias have their own groups and the Sunnis have their own groups, and I think each one of them consider the other person not to be Muslim enough. So I mean, just give you a pop culture reference. Just in the Oscars, there was this actor. His last name is Ali. He won the Oscars. So this guy happens to be a convert to Ahmadiyya Islam, which is actually a sect within Islam who believe that, which is kind of like the Mormonism of the Muslim world. They believe that there was another prophet came in, or he's like the reincarnation of Jesus and Imam Mahdi. He came into Pakistan and he has the newer message of Islam. So anyway, these groups are actually considered apostates, even though they share most of the same religious beliefs as the Sunnis and the Shias. I mean, I think the same. They pray 5 times a day. They fast during Ramadan. But at the same time, they're both considered apostates by Sunnis and Shias. And in Pakistan, you are not allowed to get a passport without signing that you declare the Ahmadis to be non-Muslims. So within Pakistan, they actually have a rule that you're not allowed to have your passport issued to you if you don't declare Ahmadiyya Muslim community to be non-Muslims. Then if you say yes, then they will give you the passport.
That's outrageous. I mean, anybody complaining about free speech has to think about that.
Exactly. So and Ahmadiyya are considered actually, so as I said, like even though they share, kind of the same questions. Are Mormons the Christians, right? I mean, they have a lot in common with Christianity, but they may not be the real Christians, but they're closer to Christians than than Hindus are.
Yeah, I was raised Mormon. I mean, I always thought the Mormons were Christian. Every Mormon I know thinks they're Christian.
Exactly. So Ahmadiyya is kind of the same thing, and yet they are declared apostates. So that's where people say, why the biggest victims of ISIS are Muslims, is because for many of the extremists, they consider, and you can go further. I mean, it's not, I wish it's only an ISIS problem. So, I mean, you have within Saudi Arabia and Pakistan, and they have so much discrimination against minority Muslim communities, like the Shias, like the Ahmadiyya, like the Ismailis. And the same if you switch the card in Iran, for example, in which is a Shia majority country, they have lots of discrimination against Sunni minorities. So, I mean, that is where, how can someone bring the nuance over here? How can, on one side, that we're opposed to extremism and extremist values, and on the other side, Muslims are human beings and they deserve equal rights everywhere. And
one of the things that I would like people to realize is that an awful lot of people who call themselves Christian in this country don't have anything Christian about them. They're drug addicted, criminal history, fornicators with alcohol problems and all of this. They just call it. They don't read the Bible. They don't even know what's in it. They don't know what a theology is, but they'll declare themselves Christian and then they get a free pass, right?
Yeah.
We have the same thing we have plenty of Muslims that, Muslim women, for example, that don't wear the hijab or whatever. We have it's a cultural diversity situation. It's where you're from, it's what your sect you belong to, and so forth, and how well practiced you are. Because there are people in Saudi Arabia who drink alcohol. They just do it secretly.
Yeah.
And you have quite a few Muslims who are Muslim culturally, or who will say they're Muslim and never give it another thought, but who don't go through all the other practices and everything, just like most, hypocritical Christians are.
Yeah, so I mean that's where the spectrum I was talking about. So I mean so there are people who are conservative Muslims, but at the same time pro-secularism, and because they live in minorities, so they favor secularism as a form to protect them from being discriminated by the larger religion, like Christianity and Judaism and so on. And then you have liberal Muslims, who what you just described is that people who may not adhere to the fundamentals or the mainstream interpretation of what Islam is, and they drink and they support liberal values and they and I would argue, I mean, so what are the things that are mostly getting ignored because of the constant negative news that's coming out from the Middle East and stuff, is that there is actually a growing minority of many liberal Muslims or ex-Muslims and atheists. So I mean, I would argue that atheism is the largest growing minority right now in the Muslim world.
Well, that's encouraging.
Thanks to the power of the internet, social media in particular, and the fact that people are getting access to information that they were not able to access before due to the restrictions of the environment. And also, as a result of the rise of Islamic extremism and the rise of ISIS and all of these jihadist groups, many Muslims, like at least within my age of between 30 and 20 and so on, they are saying that, is this like real Islam? I don't want anything to do with that thing. Or they would hold like a much more moderate view. So, I mean, if there is anything beneficial comes from ISIS, is that it is the largest creator of atheists within the Muslim world.
Well, that's outstanding. I noticed that in general polls about what contributes to atheism, the number one for Christian converts to atheism or deconverts in the United States, the number one reason given was that they read the Bible. Revelations of Science is actually a tertiary answer. It's not a very popular answer. The second most common answer for why people gave up their religion, and I think this is true of Islam as well by your description, is the hypocrisy of the church, or in this case of, the clergy and by whatever name. Yeah.
So people have a reaction to that. And actually, I think like one of the discussions about, I remember it was between Dennett and Dawkins, and they were talking about why in the UK, even though they have an official religion compared to the United States, they actually have more atheists compared to the United States. And one of the explanations that I think probably Dennett gave was that in that regard, when religion is actually mixed up with politics, being an atheist or being a secularist becomes an act of political dissidence, right? So to be against the government that is intertwined with the church is to be against the church as well. So to some extent, theocracies and the opposition of theocracies, let's say the opposition of the Iranian Ayatollahs or the Saudi Wahhabi regime, a form of that opposition becomes secularism, or if you take it further, it's going to be atheism. And I think that is partially true. What's happening right now within the Muslim world is that because people are getting sick and tired of religious demagogues. Obviously, not everybody. I mean, I wish the percentage is higher, but at the same time, there is a movement going on. I mean, almost every week, I receive maybe 100 and 150 emails from ex-Muslims or secularists from Pakistan, Bangladesh, Morocco, Iraq, you name it, of saying, wow, I thought I'm the only one. And there seems like there is a movement with, like, there's a large amount of people that are either losing their religion or want to like become anti-theocracy and anti-Sharia law and stuff. And for me, I mean, that's what I'm actually dedicating my work to help, is that these are the people, in my opinion. I mean, everybody's talking about fighting ISIS and stuff. And I always mention that the way I look at ISIS is that I compare them to AIDS, not HIV. They are the symptom, not the disease. The disease is the ideology that is feeding ISIS, and that is radical Islamic terrorism. So what we need is a counter narrative. We need counter messaging to the ideology of ISIS. And the best people who carry the baton against that narrative are the liberals and the secularists and the ex-Muslims of the Muslim world. And other than dropping tens of thousands of bombs to kill Al-Qaeda, and then you kill the leader, and then eventually a new leader comes up, I am advocating for more of a war of ideas, because I think eventually, if we really want to defeat Islamic extremism, we have to support the voices of real moderates within the Muslim world and prop them up and put them in the leadership as a counter
that's very much what I want to. I want education, I want communication, and I want a functional foreign policy, which seems to be completely opposite of what we're getting.
I share your concern. Is that I think that has been an issue going on for a bit. Is that it seems like for some people is that starting a war is really easy, and going into a military adventure seems to be the easiest option. And I'm not for that. I'm not a pacifist in any form. I do support at least fighting ISIS physically, but at the same time, I don't think that the physical war is really what is going to bring the solution. I think it has to be at least a combination of education and ideas, and as a last resort, we can use the use of force. But it seems that pulling the trigger is easy for some people.
Yeah, without much thought about it. All right, well, Faisal, I want to thank you very much this is probably a little bit twice as long as I'd intended the interview to be, but it went well. And I want to thank you for being on and sharing your perspective on this.
Of course. Thank you so much for considering me.
Hey, is there anything else you want to plug before we go?
If people are interested about my work, they can go to my website, FAISALALMUTAR, and they can also find my Facebook page and Twitter, in which I post about my projects and all what I'm doing over there.
Okay. Faisal Saeed Al Mutar, thank you for being our guest. This is Secular Nation. Good night.
Good night. Thank you.